And welcome to this week's mailbox, and today we've got a variety of topics including ignorance on WoW factors when it comes to debate, especially on forums, coordination amongst the WoW developers, GCDs in PvP and PvE, who'd have thunk it, and getting into beta as well as a couple of others as well. So the first thing to note would be that yes, more than 20 did get it right. The Where's the Mailbox from last week was indeed in Mudsprocket. Here is this week. So the deal is with this one, if at least 20 people are able to tell me the zone and the settlement where the mailbox is to be found, then I will continue to allow gnomes to be unfiltered from the chat on my live streams. So on to the first one, and a few statements here. First of all, it says, not every class is getting class buffs. Unfortunately, that is true. Blizzard haven't officially said that. But it's not just an inference. It doesn't seem to be happening now. Although when it says not every class needs class buffs, one of these cases, when you look at the classes that are getting those class buffs, and when you look at what it will do, actually there's something very wrong with that statement. So, mages, which are always strong. Warlocks. Is it Warlocks still getting it? I'm pretty sure Warlocks are still getting it. They're always strong as well. Warriors, they get Rallying Cry. They're always pretty strong too. Demon Hunters. If you've got casters in your raid, you're going to need a Demon Hunter. They've certainly got it in. So when you add it up, and Windwalkers as well, bring them. So you're going to look at a raid, and you're going to go, okay, well, we need a Warrior, because they bring the attack power buff. You're going to want a Windwalker, because they bring a buff. You're going to bring a Demon Hunter because they bring a buff. And then you're going to say, well, DKs bring like grips when that's needed, but if that's not needed, okay, you don't need them. Those people are guaranteed to get in. So what class buffs do when only a few have them, it means if any class ever brings strong utility, we've seen this already with rogues and so on, players of that class, even if they're not very good, are going to get into guilds that are much higher than their average skill levels. And they're going to get in. They're not going to be benched unless they are actively wiping. And I mean consistently wiping. You can even get away with people wiping more than another person would get away with because they bring this thing. And if that guild cannot get another Demon Hunter or Warrior or something like that, you can do half the damage sometimes. It depends on the roster. It depends on who's actually in the raid. But sometimes you could do way less damage than everyone else. But your buffs everyone else by enough that's worth it. Half might be a bit of an exaggeration. It sort of depends what you bring. But if you've got a right load of casters, you know, like in our guild, for example, we've had times where we've had like 3 mages, 2 warlocks, boomkin, shadow priest. If you don't bring a demon hunter, you're losing loads of DPS. You bring a demon hunter, that demon hunter could be shite. Doesn't matter. Just don't die. Keep that buff. That's what you need. It's in the form of a debuff, I believe, actually, the demon hunter one. But, you know, against those targets. So it does actually throw it into complete chaos. It was already going to be bad when I was talking about class buffs before, when they weren't equal, you know, and some were better than others. But to have some class that just don't bring them at all. So the ones that do bring them, you must have them. You absolutely must have them. And that's regardless of how good the player is. When it says, so for example, Warlocks and Druids already have a plethora of useful raid and group utility. Indeed they do, absolutely agree. But if the suggestion is that they're only giving the class buffs to the ones that are not so desirable for raids, well, it doesn't. Because they're, you know, the very desirable ones are getting them. Warriors are getting them. Mages are getting them. You know, so priests are getting them. So the ones that you would have in your raid anyway are the ones who are getting them. So that one sort of falls down. That's certainly not Blizzard's thinking. I think what Blizzard's thinking is very much what my thinking was at the start, is that you cannot have class buffs for all these classes and make all of them equally good. The bigger problem is going to be, though, not even raiding, although that is going to be a big problem. The bigger problem is going to be Mythic plus Dungeons. You know, because you can, although each individual class is not bringing as big a buff, obviously Demon Hunter brought there. And if you've got your, you know, let's say a couple of mages, couple of, let's say 6 casters, just for the sake of argument, because that's not unusual for a mythic raid at any rate, or even a decent-sized heroic raid. you're not always going to have 6 casters in a Mythic Plus Dungeon, so the value of the buff is not as high. But if you've got, for 2 of your DPS, casters, they're going to want a Demon Hunter. You know, it's how it is. Anyway, so on to the next one. Now these, I mean, that's, you know, where you can sort of argue the toss on that one. But the next statements are just straight up wrong. And this is where we get a bit of a problem when you're trying to have discussions on the forums. We're trying to push discussions forward in terms of the next expansion, and people just make statements that are just straight up wrong. Very few defensives are on the global cooldown. Heals are not defensives. I totally agree, heals are not defensives. They are throughputs. Very few defensives are on the global cooldown. This is simply not true. All of my defensives are on the global cooldown in BFA, and all of the ones that are just pure defensives are on the global cooldown in Legion and have been actually since vanilla. And the same is true of most classes. Very few defensives are on the cooldown. If you go through all of them and you want to name the ones that are off the global cooldown as opposed to the ones on the global cooldown, there is one list that's going to be way longer than the other. And it's not the ones off the global cooldown. So the vast majority of defensives are on the global cooldown. You just must play a class, if you play a class at all, that is the lucky one. Next one, it says, my simple solution, so this was, of course, talking about the GCD thing, is garbage. Well, you could explain why, but never mind. It says, would require a hefty amount of developer time. It requires no developer time at all. It just requires the developer to say, do this thing. You know, it requires no more development time than doing what they've already done. They've put it on the global cooldown. That required a thing to be done. It's manually done for each particular ability. That's how it is possible for them to have some on the global cooldown and some off that are all basically the same ability, because it's just done manually. It's a simple process. That's a piece of piss. Now on to the next one. It says a real simple solution would be to limit offensive throughput buffs, so we're talking about DPS and healing cooldowns here, to 1 per spec, and leave them on the global cooldown. That would be fine, and that was one of the, when I went through, on the day they talked about this, I went through a series of ways in which they could tackle it, and still, you know, solve their problems. And one of them was indeed, you know, for example, me as a Ret Paladin, we've moved to the position where in Legion we only have 1 cooldown. That's it, just 1. We used to have several. We've now got 1. And, you know, one of the suggestions was, amongst this and amongst other things as well, I came up with about 4 or 5, was just limit it to 1 like we've got. What's wrong with that? But there are players, and I don't mean, you know, people who want to have their cake and eat it. Sensible players, players who are very objective about things, were saying they quite like the idea of having, you know, a DPS cooldown for this situation, another one for this situation. They're not that bothered if they can't stack them up. They're okay with that. What they'd like to use them is at optimal times depending on the situation. Now, I'm not going to say I necessarily agree with that. However, it's a valid point, and, you know, there are a lot of people that do feel that way. So, again, what I would be suggesting, which doesn't, I mean, a lot of people are picking up on the 5-second thing. The 5-second thing was just there because I just perceive Blizzard want to stop you doing these things in isolation. I have no particular issue with that myself. You could reduce it to, say, 1 second, which is going to be close to what a global cooldown is anyway for people with a reasonable amount of haste. It doesn't have to be 5 seconds. But the issue is that Blizzard don't want you stacking these things up or using them very, very close in proximity to each other time-wise. So that's the way they go there. But when you say that way, no spec has more than 1, blah, blah, blah. But the issue with that is, as I say, there are a lot of players that wouldn't like that. Now, the only players, in terms of the solution that I prefer, is my preferred solution, and I know it is for a lot of other people as well. The thing with that is the only people who would be really aggrieved with that are those who are going to be aggrieved with the new situation anyway. So we're already, the people who you know, the ones who like to stack up all these things, they're the only people who are stuffed by it, but they're stuffed anyway. That's a given. It's just that there's a lot of collateral damage with what Blizzard have done. That's the big issue there. On to the next one. So this is on the Vulpera. There's a lot of furries out there. So it says 1 there, because I was saying they can't be an allied race. It says then they'll become an official race. But I said there's no issue with that. I said that if they are introducing the game as a playable race, that they would be an actual new race, not an allied race. I was simply pointing out that the way allied races are built at the moment is that they are other forms of races that already exist as playable races. Vulpera do not exist as playable races. They're furry goblins, sure, but they're not intended to be actual goblins. They just use that wire, that framework. But if they ever were made playable races, it would just be as a new race. But then, no one's saying that there won't ever be any more new races, that everything's just going to be allied races. Of course there will be new races at some point, or we assume so. Assuming World of Warcraft has still got a few more years to go. And then it says, number 2, it says, yeah, I still do. Okay, you still want them, that's fine. It says, your opinions aren't mine, don't speak for me. I never said I do. In fact, one thing I'm always very, very clear about in my videos is I never say what people should do. Even in my guides, when I'm explaining how to do a thing, I make it very, very clear to explain how things work so people can make their own decisions. Even when I know, for example, Ret Paladin guides, I know that if you want to do anything at the moment, you use these talents. There's one set of talents that you use for everything, let's be honest. But even then, I'm doing a guide on it, I still don't say that. I will just say, well, these would be the normal ones to take, but, this does this might be useful in this situation, this situation. I give you the situations in which things will be useful or not useful, and you can make your own decisions. It's far more important to explain how something works than just to simply do this, 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 and this. People learn nothing from that. And of course, the people who do that are the ones who themselves don't even understand it well enough. And that just throws everyone wrong. So yeah, I'm not saying that people shouldn't want Vulpera as a race. I'm just saying that most probably don't. Let's see now. Next one. So what's this one? Is this the cooldowns thing again? It says an even better solution would be to not design a class or spec that needs a bunch of cooldowns to do any damage. Blizzard is punishing the entire player base for taking advantage of Blizzard's own bad class design. I mean, obviously there are, and this is the coordination aspect that I want to talk about. There are aspects of Blizzard design that often clash. It'd be natural to think, I know the majority of people probably think, that there's a lot of coordination on things like this. Ian Hazakostas, for example, game director, does the Q&As and he talks on a range of topics. So he at least must know what's going on in all areas. Not necessarily. People are underestimating the extent to which it's quite easy to filter. It's not even though it's done live, they're not getting the questions live. They're not doing it like I do my live discussions where you can throw anything at me and I'll talk about it as best as I can. He doesn't do that, so he's definitely got chance to go through the things. Okay, yeah, that's what's going to come up. Very much like a politician when they've got to answer questions in Parliament. And we know that they don't coordinate because he himself said so. In the Tomb of Sargeras, it just laid everything bare. We had all those soak mechanics, especially on the mythic modes, and he said it himself because the people, they had their initial discussions, then they all split into teams to design the bosses, and they didn't know what each other were doing. And that's a lack of coordination within a team. That's one team. The encounter design team for that raid is one team. They split up into groups to do individual bosses, but they're all part of the same team. I don't know what the geography is like in there. I'm guessing they all work fairly close to each other, geographically within Blizzard headquarters as well. So what reason was there for not coordinating or talking between them? So then try and picture this. So if we know that because Ian Hazakostas himself has said it, we haven't inferred it, he's directly said that. Now, even though you hope that at least has been put right, we don't know it's been put right. We just hope it has. We can't then imagine that overnight they've gone from no coordination even within a team to good coordination amongst all the teams that could have an impact on each other, which is basically everything. Every team can have an impact on another team. And, so it's not surprising you do get design philosophies that clash with other ones. And the classic one for Battle for Azeroth, I've mentioned before, is on the one hand, there's an overall design philosophy to increase downtime. Now, some people are blowing it out of proportion to exactly how much that is. But they are increasing downtime. There seems to be a quota at work here. But we know that they've got to increase downtime. That's a design philosophy. But also, we've got the global cooldown changes. Now, they work against each other. People talking about the global cooldown slowing the class down actually does the opposite. The fact that you've got to that more abilities are on the global cooldown means that more of that downtime is filled up with those global cooldowns. So you're trying to achieve this quota, but then another design philosophy scuppers it, because now you're going to have less downtime because you're waiting for the global cooldowns on things that previously didn't have global cooldowns. So it's just two things working against each other there. And there are other examples as well, but I don't need to go through it all. But yeah, this is ultimately something that is going to happen. Now, whether you agree it's bad class design that's leading to this having multiple cooldowns, I'm not so sure. I do know there are people who appreciate, because that was one of my, the first day when Blizzard announced this, I straight away went through several solutions they could have gone through that would have solved the problems they were talking about without having more far-reaching consequences. One of which was, we'll just give everyone a single DPS cooldown. Because I remember, from my point of view as a Retribution Paladin, there have been times very recently when we've had multiple DPS cooldowns ourselves. And it was all condensed into one. So as a Retribution Paladin, I get Avenging Wrath. That's it. That is. I used to have also Guardian of the Ancient Kings. There was another one I could take as a talent. You could have had an Inquisition. We've got an Inquisition again now. So, so in Legion, we've had one DPS cooldown. Could be argued in BFA with talents we could potentially have more again. But, in the here and now, that's what we've got. So why not do that for everyone? If it's a particular issue, why not do it for everyone? But, then I was told by people who are not, complete dicks about it, that actually they like the idea that they have this cooldown for this situation, this for this situation. They don't necessarily want to load them up and use them at the same time. They're quite happy that at this particular opportunity, they're going to use this one and later on they're going to use that one. But that was just one solution that I went through. But it is possible still to manage and still have all that as well. But ultimately, we are always going to get these until or unless, it's getting very late in the development of World of Warcraft. I don't mean BFA, I mean the whole World of Warcraft has got to be nearer its end than it starts, surely, to be able to change these things. And also, maybe it comes of this. You try and think of different industries. So Blizzard, a games industry, the people at the top of that organisation were themselves guys working out of their bedrooms and garages, building a games company up from nothing, young guys. And obviously, I'm sure they're not stupid. They will, of course, they're not stupid. They will have tried to educate themselves in running a business and got advice and things like that. But they've nonetheless worked through their position by designing games. And so has everyone else. Chris Metzen, of course, was taken on as an employee. He sort of pretty much became the most senior person who was not one of the original founders of the games company as an actual employee. And other ones as well have come in from, they various backgrounds, but worked their way up. Ian Hazakostas was like, I don't know what he specifically worked, but he was a law graduate, wasn't he? Don't know whether he was an actual lawyer or just solicitor or whatever he was doing. But he's from, he's not from business or anything like that. And, it may be similar to me working in education as well. People who get promoted to positions of being principals and so on, generally speaking, are teachers. And they get promoted by being, first of all, demonstrating that they're good in the classroom, and then they want a promotion, so they get promotion. And it's always tends to be based around their teaching skills. And then all of a sudden, they're not doing any teaching at all, but they're an administrator. And it might sound a bit mad to some people, that situation, that you have someone who is just 100% an administrator, but they got there on the back of their teaching skills that they now don't use. Although you could argue is important to recognise. I know a lot of teachers wouldn't like the idea of someone from an administration background coming in doing that job because they wouldn't understand what it's like at the chalk face, so to speak. Not that we use chalk anymore. But, but whereas in a company that is solely focused on making money, that's all they care about, making money. They are going to have a much more organised way of dealing with teams and getting teams to communicate with each other. So my long-winded point is potentially that there's not a lot of coordination at Blizzard because they don't know how to set that up. I could have done that much quicker, couldn't I? Never mind. Waffling's fun. I know most of you are only listening to this while you do World Quest anyway. So next one says, as a player that mostly engages in PvP, this sounds worse. So again, coming back to the global cooldown thing, than what Blizzard is doing. I've never been accused of being intelligent, so maybe I'm just misunderstanding the point, but no. So You may have misunderstood the point. So what I said, just really briefly, what I'm saying is now, as I say, I came up with a load of solutions. Now, given what Blizzard are saying and what they've done, I have a preferred one now, which is where you basically get, you know, your throughput, cooldowns, your defensives, your movement speed, and just have effectively a shared global cooldown for them that doesn't affect other global cooldowns. It's a separate one. And I just threw it out there and said like 5 seconds. Now, there's two parts to that. First of all, he said, as a player, this sounds worse than what Blizzard is doing. Yes, it may be, but remember, Blizzard's problem is PvP. Their problem is specifically PvP. And at the moment, it's hurting PvE. That's the issue. But when I say 5 seconds, I'm not saying, I haven't, you know, done months of calculations on working out the optimal time to do this. They could just make it 1 second. They could just make it a shared global cooldown that isn't the same global cooldown as other global cooldowns. You know, the time frame doesn't necessarily matter. What matters is that it would allow Blizzard to prevent what they want to prevent. And remember, what they want to prevent is what they call common PvP practice. Now, I don't know that it's common PvP practice. I know a number of, you know, fairly accomplished PvP players who have said it's not that common. But then I've also had some other people who claim to be, you know, strong PvP players who've said that it is as well. I don't know. All I know is that Blizzard have a beef with PvP as a result of this. So whatever solution is done, even if it's the cack-handed attempt that Blizzard are now making, is going to hit that PvP practice because that's what it's designed to do. The problem is that it not only ruins what it's designed to ruin, it ruins a load of other things as well. And that's all it's about. And the only thing that fits, that is a solution to all of Blizzard's problems now, is something whereby you must not be able to stack DPS cooldowns, but they have no real issue with you using it in amongst the rotation. So that's why I say that it has effectively a separate global cooldown. I just set it at 5 seconds, you know, which, okay, that would be a long one. It might not need to be that much. It might just need to be 2 seconds or 1 second, as long as you can't stack them all the time. But the reason why I was thinking in terms of a slightly longer one was because Blizzard were talking about the concept of not being able to do DPS cooldowns and buffs and blow someone up, and a defensive as well. And I was thinking to myself, well, a global cooldown isn't that, you know, if you've got plenty of haste especially, you can quite easily press your defensive first and then your offensive cooldown. It's still a couple of seconds before you're doing what you were doing anyway. Is a couple of seconds really that much time to be able to, you know, shield yourself as well as turn yourself into a Titan of Fury? Not really, you know. Someone can only run so far on 2 seconds. Next one. So, okay, so another one from a PvP player. It says, I disagree and let me explain why. So it says, in PvP, you would wait for a player to use their offensive CDs, CCD them and kill them, since they can't use defensives or mobility to get away. Fine. This change would essentially reduce the PvP skill cap. Unfortunately, they don't say why. It says, which is the opposite of what Blizz is saying they're trying to do. I'm not quite sure why, though. They don't say why. And I can only now infer things. So if what I'm supposed to infer is they've used their offensive CD, you have CC'd them, and then they can't use their defensive, if that's what you're suggesting. Well, you're just saying that they can't anyway. But he says because you say you then kill them since they can't use defensives or mobility. So I don't see why this makes any difference at all. Unfortunately, the person has not explained it. If someone can explain it, then we might get somewhere. And then it says, not to mention it would be a mess for some classes that have frequent cooldowns, such as sub-rogues, with SOD being on a 30-second cooldown and Fate on 15. Again, the timing doesn't necessarily matter. As I say, you can reduce it down to 1 second if that helps. All I'm trying to get across is that they don't share global cooldowns with throughput abilities, essentially, is the way you could simply put it. Now it says then, in PvE, of course now I can discuss this, let's say you have a boss fight where you need to use both a defensive and a movement speed to get away. Let's say that you are required to run and soak a patch far off for the group, but that overlaps with high raid damage. What do you do in this case? Well, in a raid, you know this, and also having them on the global cooldown prevents you doing them both anyway. It says in that case, hope you don't die. No. What you do in that case, if you need to go away and soak something, then you make sure you're in a position to do that. There's plenty of fights where you can do that. And when you do have to run away and soak something, you tend not to have to need the defensives either, because not everyone has defensives. You know. But yeah, the idea that you would need to immediately press both doesn't happen now. You can't do that in Legion. You can't do it in BFA with the system they have in now. It doesn't actually change anything, what I'm suggesting, because I can talk on this one. And as I say, what you are supposed to do in a raid is you're supposed to plan for the next step. Where guilds, where individual raid teams suffer most of the time with mechanics is because it catches people out. And it catches people out because people are only focused on the here and now and not what's coming next. You know, it's like something like on Iminar, if you get the canister, the sleep canister, you need to know when that's coming in so that you can be in a position to, as soon as you get it, move out. If you have to react to it because you weren't paying attention, it can happen to the best of us. You tunnel in the boss or whatever, and you react to it, of course, you're going to be slower. You're not in a good position to be able to move out. You're not at max melee range or something like that. And you're reacting to it, so you've got your reaction time to deal with as well. But that's poor planning. And what you do in that situation is you plan better next time. Same with needing a movement speed. There's no way you need a movement speed because, again, not everyone has a movement speed. Of worth, anyway. But anyway, there we go. Next one. I've been dabbling Guild Wars 2 recently, and you have to earn abilities in your specialization, a bit like you described in the video. I wasn't really talking about earning them as such, just leveling, but I might know what they mean. I haven't played Guild Wars 2, though, so I might be guessing. And maybe what I'm guessing is you get skills for, like, you get skills and ability by using that ability. You know, get like mini experience things for each ability. I'm not sure that's really for WoW, but I'll read the whole thing anyway. And it says, but some of your skills stay the same depending on what weapon you have equipped. Made me think, how about we just don't have leveling and just have characters that unlock abilities in a scaled world? And why not have the mage reward track that gives you abilities through class quests or something like what the demon hunters had with killing different demons to get their abilities? That would mean more work with the classes for Blizzard, but they could probably just have some abilities locked behind quests that explain to you what the ability is supposed to do. They could. I think the issue is some things are too much of a departure away. Something like this might be a good idea if they were to relaunch another Warcraft MMO. Let's say they wanted to do that. I'm not convinced they do. I really don't think they do. But let's say they did. Whereas there's a lot of systems that they seem fairly set on in World of Warcraft. It's like it's the World of Warcraft way and they don't seem to want to touch it. There's certain aspects of the game they seem happy to modernise, and quite a lot that they don't. Some of which may be technical, some of which maybe they can't. That's understandable too. So I do like the idea of developing skills, of course. And there are games, there are MMOs that do that, where you develop the skill in an ability by using it. I'd be totally in favour of that. In terms of the just not having levelling at all, now, I think there sort of needs to be some levels because it's a familiarity thing. The way MMOs struggle as it is sometimes with accessibility, and what World of Warcraft always, especially at the start, is more impressive at the start of WoW's life because that came at a time, which I now know now, I didn't appreciate at the time because it was my first MMO, where a lot of MMOs were quite difficult to get into. And WoW was very accessible. It was very easy to get into it. And it needs to maintain that. And I think MMOs in general should maintain that ease of accessibility. You know, developers of an MMO should always be mindful that, you know, MMOs you can struggle for accessibility, and you need to plan the steps. How do you introduce a player from complete beginner, has never played MMOs of any kind before, maybe has never played role-playing games on computers before? How do you get them into the game so they can enjoy it straight away and gradually ease them up the different difficulties of content? And I think they always need to be mindful of that journey of complete beginner to expert in the game. And I think levels are something that gives it accessibility. But I think there's a limit. I think, you know, when you should just have a set number of levels that teach you those abilities, and then after that there should be another progression system that are not traditional levels, because otherwise you end up with the situation we've got now, where we've got level 120 soon, and I just think it's a mess. I think it's a massive mess, and you know, what's to come? Where are we going to go? How many more expansions are there going to be? I mean, every expansion potentially could be the last, but if there's another expansion, that's going to be 130. If there's another 2 expansions, you know, up to 140, another 3 up to 150. It's just mad. It's absolutely insane. Insane! But, you know, there you go. But yeah, I am totally in favour of the idea of developing skills and ability by using, you get that ability. Behind a quest would be even better. Again, having quest lines where you learn your skill, so better than just, the original was just to go to the trainer and pay some silver or gold. Now it just pops up in our spell book. The idea of going to a trainer who then says, oh, I have this ability that I can show you. You need to do some practice. You know, a bit like your Karate Kid, you know, wipe on, wipe off. That sort of thing is great. Go on a quest, learn this thing, get this ability done. And you don't have to come up with different quests for different classes. It could be the same basic quest for every single class. You just get a different ability at the end of it. That would be fine. I'd be totally cool with that. Next one. Oh, okay. So any tips for getting into the beta? Should I activate my WoW sub to increase chance to get into the beta? Okay. I will now go down, and this will be an exhaustive list. These are the ways you get into the beta for any expansion in World of Warcraft. First up, you get yourself on a list. Now, this is gone, by the way. There are several types of people who will be invited immediately when an alpha becomes open, when it's sort of open alpha. So you've got very senior theory crafters that are in direct conversation with Blizzard. They will get in. Very, very large streamers, you know, the real influencers, the big streamers, people who run major websites like Wowhead and stuff like that, they'll get a few. Although even then it's only the big movers and shakers within them who will get those beta keys. And friends and family, of course. But, you know, you have to be a friend and family of someone who works at Blizzard, then you can get yourself put on a list as well. Those people will get in immediately. Obviously, the time to be on any of those lists is gone. But that's the specific list that Blizzard says, right, these people will just automatically get in one. There will always be some random ones as well. In terms of getting the random chance, then all you can do is flag yourself as being interested in the beta. You do that in your account management page. You presumably already know about that. It makes no difference whether you have an active WoW sub or not. None at all. Only whether you've got a Battle.net account and it's on there, it's flagged as that. There's loads of people who don't have an active subscription, haven't for, you know, some time, who get them. It just seems to be random. Now, some of those people may be ones who are on the friends and family list and just stop playing but still get them. I don't know. But what I do know is it makes no difference whether you've got an active sub. So, you know, do that or not, makes no difference. The other way to get in is the cutting edge wave, which was quite late this time. It was very early on in Legion, where at a certain point they basically invite, actually not everyone, but quite a lot of people. It seems to be most people who have cutting edge in the latest raid at that time. So this time round, it was anyone who has cutting edge, in other words, had killed Mythic Argus. You know, whole guilds will just be invited. Not everyone in the guild, being a social in that guild won't help you. It's still a personal thing. And then the only other way where you can do anything about it, and this is the way that remains, there will come a time when Blizzard just want to swamp the place with people. But they'll also want to ramp up the marketing, and they will kill two birds with one stone here. Now, at the moment, it's very important to note there are no such thing as a beta key. There used to be, and there isn't anymore. They just flag your account. However, there are beta keys that come later on in the development cycle, which they will give to large streamers and major websites and other influencers to give away as competitions. Because this is a bit like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So people like Preach, Asmongold, you'll get the guys at Wowhead and MMO Champion, and some others as well, will be given keys to give away. They will run promotions going, oh, you know, join the stream or whatever, or enter this competition. It'll be a very simple one. And the winners will get a beta key. Now, it's very, very important that you are aware that if anyone sends you an email or something like that going, congratulations, you've got this beta key, do this, click on that. Ignore that completely, that's a scam. You get a lot of scams around about this time. And the number of scams that will go out will increase as soon as those keys actually do become a reality. Make sure that if you're expecting a key, first of all, that you have actually entered something to get the key. In other words, if someone just randomly sends you a key, don't think, oh, I must have entered something. No, or I must... Make sure that you have actually done it. And secondly, make sure it's come from the person you think it has. You know, you might, for example, if you go onto Preacher's channel and you think you've won a key from him and something comes from an email that looks like it's a Preach Gaming email, just check it's the same Preach Gaming email that's on his channel. And something like that. Just be very, very careful that you're not clicking on dodgy links. But that is the only thing you can do to proactively try and get yourself a beta key now. Just wait for that time to come. Keep an eye on the big streamers and the major websites and their Twitters. You know, just following them on Twitter is a good way to do it. At some point, they'll start tweeting that they've got some keys up for grabs and then start doing what they say to do, basically. And that's all you can do. Those are the only ways to guarantee getting yourself in. Or to get yourself in, whether it's guaranteed or not. Next one. It says, well, more important, there should be a new talent at 120. It's a poor design that there are no more talents after 100 for most classes. The present talent system introducing kata is poor compared to the pre-kata talent system. I mean, that's a matter of opinion. What I would say, however, is Blizzard don't really think long-term with any system they put in. And it's sort of natural in a way, because if they mess up an expansion, there might not be much of a future. I mean, Warlords of Draenor they got away with, but only because Legion worked. If Legion had been much of a disaster as WoD, then you might well be looking at the end of WoW. So when you've got a system that's in for a very long time, it can easily be one that you don't sort of really consider fit for purpose. They are never thinking to themselves of how is this going to work in 3 expansions time. They're fully focused on making sure the next expansion is the best that it can be. And because they can't do anything else. So there is, I mean, they very rarely even use the word future whenever they're talking about anything. I thought there was a recent Q&A where Blizzard, or Ian Hazacosta specifically, was talking about doing something to future-proof something, which was a curious statement. And I can't remember what it was now. I seem to remember it was something I did not approve of. But I can't actually remember what it was. But he did use the term future-proofing. But they almost never use that term because they almost never do anything that's made for the future. And you could argue they don't need to, because with every expansion they always change a lot of systems anyway. It's just they don't change all of them. Then some systems might last for a very long time. And I think there is a real argument at the moment that Blizzard just don't appreciate how crap it is to not feel like you're getting anything as you level up. So I've talked a lot about that myself, so I'm not going to go over that again. But yes, I'm not someone who even thinks that getting a talent at level 120 would deal with it either. Because when you get to 120, you do get things anyway. You get access to new content and stuff like that. That's your level cap. You don't actually need something at the level cap because you already get a load of stuff anyway. It's the other levels that you get on your way to 120 for which you get nothing that needs dealing with, in my personal opinion. So the fact that we don't have more talents, I'm personally not that bothered about. But I do also understand that some people like it when there's a lot of talents. In other words, a lot of ways to customize your character and a lot of potential variation. Blizzard would counter that, as indeed they have in the past, by saying that in reality that variation was an illusion because there were so many cookie cutter builds. And they weren't necessarily wrong. There was some variation permissible, but not necessarily a lot, and often it was for niche situations. But, you know, but what is the best system is a matter of opinion. But what I think is maybe more objective thing to say is that we don't really get anything for levels. So it comes back to a previous comment. Why do we even bother with levels? Why, when a new expansion comes out, do they actually have it as a selling point? Oh, you can get some extra levels now. Because they don't do that. I mean, Elder Scrolls Online, keep going on about a week tomorrow, the new expansion is going to be available to play. No new levels in that. It's like, you know, no new levels in any expansion that's been there. They've got the Champions level. It's a separate thing. That's like Paragon levels. But the actual levels, no, that's not one of the selling points. The selling points is new content, new quest, new zone, new trade skill, and things like that. That's the selling point. And that could be the selling point for WoW, but they've got themselves into this corner whereby every expansion we expect new levels, we expect redesigns of classes. I saw a video. I didn't actually watch the video, but I saw there was a video. What was it? I think it might have been Signs of Kalani or something, talking about the classes that have had the least done to them, as if that's a bad thing. Whereas from my point of view, this idea that we expect there to be redesigns is Blizzard's fault for using it as selling points after so many expansions. No, don't keep redesigning classes. Make them good, make them enjoyable, and then all you have to do is every time there's a little problem with them, then look at that class. Because what we end up with now is a situation where they've only got a limited amount of time to look at all these classes. There might be going to launch some issues still with classes because those developers have run out of time. Whereas if instead of having to work to a launch, they just kept classes as they were and only addressed them when there was an issue, because sometimes there will be. The game will get ahead of itself. Some other systems within the game will change, and all of a sudden, a particular class won't be working so well. It won't be as fluent. So then you need to do some work on it. But that's an as is. You can do that mid-expansion. You can do it at the end of it. It doesn't really matter when you just do it when it arises. But, that's the situation we've ended up with. Next one. Oh, no, hasn't come. There we go. Okay, so it says, I know this video is more general commentary on the leveling experience, but hitting level 116 is going to be the worst ever unless they add some significant reward to offset the fact our Legion legendaries will stop working. The gutting of our Legion specs will be complete, so this is the point where they need to start building them back up with a real Azeroth bonus, not just some boring passive. I mean, they can't do that because it's all scale, so they don't know which order you're going to do a load of stuff. But the point about level 116 being a bit of a cliff in terms of it being super, it won't actually be that difficult, you'll find. You will obviously lose a load of power at that point. That is true. But, I mean, this comes to a video that I'll be bringing out tomorrow as well, all being well. We're going to start off very, very powerful. And for each level, the ones who've got, as most of us who are watching this now will have, if we've been playing, even if you don't even have to be Mythic Raid or anything, your gear will actually be way better than the quest rewards on offer. So there'll come a point where each level you get, you're just going to effectively become weaker because the quest rewards are not going to be upgrades for you. So you're keeping the same gear, but each level, that haste rating, mastery rating, crit rating, versatility rating, is worth less as a percentage. And remember, what matters especially in a scaled situation, what matters is the percentage values, not the actual rating values. So we will be becoming, in a very real sense, weaker. Our haste going down will mean casts will take longer. And we will, cooldowns on my abilities will take longer. Crits just won't crit as much. I mean, you can argue because your stats will be going up that each individual ability will hit harder technically, but then the mobs are scaling as well. So you will feel weaker. And then you'll get to this point, 116, and yes, you'll have to abandon, you'll have to shed your legendaries. But there is also good news on the horizon, in that 116 is also round about the time at which the quest rewards will beat even Mythic and Taurus gear. So you could argue that that will be a boon for even Mythic Raiders at that point to help smooth it out. And you will find, because I've obviously leveled, as many people have done in the beta, with just the starter gear, because we've just had pre-mades, we can't copy characters yet, and it's all absolutely fine until you get to 120. Your problems are actually going to start when you get to 120. But more on that tomorrow or Tuesday whenever I can get that video done. Next one. So, saying, this is someone who was going on and on and on about Master League being inherently biased. Says, there is always bias when giving out loot, whether you think so or not. Please don't sit there and pretend that you and your guild are the one exception to being human beings. This person is basically suggesting that people are incapable of being objective, which is not true. Unintelligent people may be. This sounds to me like someone who's had a bad experience and just assumes everyone else is like that. But it's actually not true. It's very easy for someone who is intelligent to be aware of their own nature and to put in systems to make sure that you can account for that. It's how science works. It's how science works. You know, objectivity is a key part of that. And the issue with being biased when you're giving out loot works against your own interests. So the only people who do that, the only guilds who do that, and there are some that do, but the only guilds that do that are those who've got leaders who are inherently unintelligent. And it's as simple as that. And those guilds generally don't do very well. You know, if the only way they can do well is if they do a load of other things exceptionally well. You know, because that's a drag factor on them. If they're not giving the pieces of gear to the people who are going to help push progress, by definition, they're dragging their progress. So the only way they can actually achieve sensible progress is if they do other things exceptionally well. So no, the vast majority have a proper plan when it comes to it. In fact, the vast majority of guilds that I have been in even talk about it ahead of time. They don't just decide as officers, they open it out to the whole guild. How are we going to deal with this? What are people's ideas on it? Well ahead of the point at which the system has to be implemented. In other words, everyone gets involved in it. So this is simply a person who just has not experienced very many guilds and certainly hasn't experienced ones who do it properly. Because in my time, I've been in a lot of guilds, going right back to vanilla, that have used a form of master looter. Always master looter, sorry, loot council effectively. And I've only once come across a guild that, exhibited any form of bias within that system. Everyone else had a system that was very plain, obvious, and open to debate, and then they implemented it. And it was all, to the point where there wasn't even a lot of discussion to be had, other than between people, because that's another thing that happens in most of these guilds, including the one I'm in now. Where there is a bit of an I'm not sure about it. They ask the raid. They say to these 2 people or 3 people, whoever it is, oh well, both of you have got a good case for this. Who do you think should get it? And they ask those people. It's not even always the officers that make the decision. So this person just has no experience of an effective guild. In that regard, maybe they're effective in other regards and therefore still do well somehow. And on to the last one. It's, holy cow, you defended gnomes. No, I didn't. This was in the Vulpera video again. To say I defended gnomes, it's a bit like if I said, Billy, you're even thicker than Johnny. I'm not defending Johnny. I'm just saying that Billy is even thicker. It's the same thing with gnomes. By saying that Vulpera are even more pathetic than gnomes, I'm not defending gnomes. I'm just saying to them, you were the bottom of the heap. You've now been joined by someone who's slightly below you, but you are still pretty much bottom of the heap. It's not defending them. If gnomes think that's a defence, then they really don't have very high ambitions. So there we go. That's this week's mailbox. Don't forget, you need to say in the comments below exactly where this is. I want the zone and the settlement. I've not made it too difficult. I think hopefully I've made it a little bit more difficult than last time. I've not made it super obscure. I'm not going to do any tricks either in future. Don't worry about blowing up the mailbox to the size of the screen just to hide any background at all. It actually doesn't look too difficult, but maybe slightly more difficult than last week's as well. And if there's at least 20, then... and it has to be something like that, because you can't make it more difficult by just saying, well, this time it should be at least 30. Because the problem is, if 20 people are going to get it right, then everyone else will just copy what they've said. Whereas, if a couple of people just say something and everyone else just apes what those people are saying, and it turns out to be wrong, you just end up looking foolish. So, yeah, I think 20 is an optimal number for that one. So thanks for watching anyway. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.